introduce myself. My name is Celeste. I'm on the Alumni team here at UKAT, and I am an addict in recovery, and I've also got a diagnosis of Bipolar Type 2. I also grew up as the child of an alcoholic, so mental health and sort of dysfunction as a result of that has always been a big part of my life. And I've always myself been I was always a bit of an odd child, and so I was always kind of like on the outside looking in at things and just didn't really sort of fit in. And it was really when I got to sort of my teenage years where my sort of mental health started to worsen. I started suffering with anxiety and depression, which was quite debilitating at times, and honestly I can't really remember a time in my life where that wasn't something that I've had experience of. So it was kind of normal for me, but things got sort of progressively difficult, and I started sort of medicating that at the age of around 13 with alcohol, and later sort of drugs. And you know, that allowed me, that sort of, the addition of alcohol into my life allowed me to feel like I could fit in, and that I was normal, and that I could be carefree and mix with my peers. So yeah, it kind of progressed throughout my first sort of 15 years. Honestly, I don't think there's a part of my life that hasn't been impacted by my mental health and addiction. And it's funny, we talk about mental health and addiction, and in my mind, you know, especially with everything I've learned over the last couple of years in recovery, the two are the same. You know, mental health is addiction, addiction is mental health. You know, they're very much, you know, part of the same thing. So, you know, my addiction is part of my mental health in the sense that I developed an addiction because that was actually, in the early days, what would treat my mental health problems. It was my medicine, and it actually worked. And that's why there are so many of us in recovery from addiction, because we found something that worked and helped us feel better, but then it kind of turns on us. And you know, going back to your question, it turned on me pretty quickly. I'd probably say that even in my early 20s, on the outside, I was functioning very well. I had a job, I always had, you know, boyfriends and partners, and you know, I had money in my pocket, I was partying, I was having a great time on the outside, but actually inside, you know, from my early 20s, I could really see that my mental health was starting to suffer. And having a father with addiction and bipolar, I started to realise that we were exhibiting a lot of the same problems. So I kind of saw, you know, a little bit of myself in him, and that was incredibly difficult. And it came to a point with me in my mid-20s when I lost my dad to addiction, I lost my dad to alcoholism, and sort of having to navigate that, which, you know, let me tell you, you know, losing someone to addiction, it's not an overnight process. It's a long, protracted, you know, awful experience. And when I got out the other side of that, when Dad passed away, my mental health was shot. It was absolutely shot. And all I was doing to try and help that was drink more, use more drugs, you know, anything so that I didn't have to have like my feet on the ground and not be sober. And so it impacted everything. I started losing jobs, started having difficulties in my relationship, my parents were constantly worried about me. So yeah, it impacted every part of my life. So it kind of started to change for me when, even though the drugs and the alcohol had stopped working, I still had the compulsion to use them. So I would go on these benders of alcohol and other substances. I would disappear for sort of 2 or 3 days, and it was becoming harder and harder to recover from those episodes. And those episodes would sort of intertwine with my mental health. So, you know, my using and drinking would actually be quite in line with whether I was sort of in a manic state or a depressive state. My bipolar was largely depression, but sometimes I'd go up into a manic state for a week or so, and I would drink and use for that whole week, and then I would, boom, go right down into this really deep, dark depression. And what happened is those peaks and troughs would be getting closer together, and they were becoming higher and lower, and it was just on this trajectory where I had a sort of white light moment one day, and I sort of saw my future, and I realised that it wasn't good. And I'm going to be honest, people talk about this, you might hear other people talking about their recovery and this white light moment or a spiritual experience. That's true for me. I actually just had this big sort of epiphany of you're done, you know, you're done, you know, you've had enough. And it's almost like I didn't decide that, something else decided that for me. And it was really quite simple. One day I was drinking, I had my last beer, didn't even finish it, I left a bit in the bottom, and I put it down, and I just said, you're done, you're going to an AA meeting tomorrow. And I did. You know, I'm always quick to say this, AA is my way, and it has absolutely worked for me, but it is not the only way. There are so many different options out there, you know, for recovery support. You know, if you're in a position where you don't have the sort of facilities to sort of pay for treatment or access to treatment, then local services are an absolutely amazing sort of place to sort of go to and actually have that first conversation with somebody who's going to understand. You know, going into your GP or talking to anyone saying, hi, I think I might have a problem with drugs or alcohol or my mental health, you know, that is extremely daunting. So just know that if you want to, you can reach out to things like your local services. There's an amazing website that we use here all the time called Talk to Frank. You just literally Google Talk to Frank, and there are so many mental health, drug and alcohol advice options on there for you to go to, including your local services. I'm an advocate for therapy, although, you know, again, some people aren't privileged enough to be able to pay for that privately. So, you know, I strongly advise, you know, if you're ever worried about your mental health and or addiction, then, you know, getting to your GP is a good idea. And sometimes GPs can be a little bit under sort of, it's not they just don't have the time to deal with complex mental health needs, and that's not their fault. But they do have sort of a clear pathway of referral, so do you know, reach out to them if you need. I have found AA for me to be the most amazing support resource. You can't meet better people, the program's amazing, and it's really taught me a new way of life. So I'm always going to be a little bit biased, but really it's about taking that first step and having a conversation with somebody. Yeah, so it's funny, I have a partner, we've been together for 3 years. So she was actually around while I was drinking and using, right at the very end. And we had a good time together, but I was really worried that when I got sober, that the basis on which we'd kind of spent a lot of time together, you know, drinking, smoking cannabis, you know, other things, and I was like, well, if I get sober, what is that going to mean for us, right? And actually, we are more happier now than we ever would have been had I carried on drinking and using. And I think that pays testament to how supportive, you know, she's been, and she's kind of changed with me. And that's the thing. You asked me like how, you know, how my relationships have changed. Every single relationship in my life has improved so much, and it's like a ripple effect because they don't need to worry about me anymore. Like, my relationship with my mum has probably been the most profoundly impacted because she has seen me change so much in the last 2 years, and actually she's picked up some pretty good things. Like, for me, like, I can kind of just sort of say to her, like, she's quite a stressed person, so I can kind of use a little bit of my AA stuff and kind of get her to kind of start using some of those tools. Because essentially we don't have to be diagnosed with a mental health problem or an addiction to experience poor mental health. Like, we all have to navigate this at some point in our lives. So it's just really wonderful to have those tools and to be able to help the people I love with those tools. So just an example is my mum will actually call me now and ask for support if she's struggling, whereas before she was very stiff upper lip. We just get on with it, we don't talk about our problems. Whereas now she's actually seen me be vulnerable in my recovery and talk about my mental health, and that's made it safer for her to do that. Every relationship in my life is better as a result of my recovery. Yeah, so AA has loads of cliches that we love to use, and you know what, I love them because they're just little things that you can go to when you're in a bit of a you know, a tricky situation or you're having a bad day. And I think my main sort of strategies for me are one day at a time. Number one, hands down, it has to be about today. If I start to think about next week, next month, next year, with relation to sort of where I'm going to be in the world, like, everything becomes very overwhelming, and I kind of, I just lose touch with what's actually quite important, which is what's in front of me right now, and just learning to let go of the things that I cannot control. Again, I think a lot of us, we sort of, if we don't feel like we have control, our mental health really starts to suffer. And we sort of start to grab onto things that we feel that will give us back that control. I've actually found that the biggest strategy that's helped me get through difficult times and stress and my recovery is to actually take a deep breath and let go of all the stuff that we're holding on to, and just focus on the things that we can do something about. You know, letting go of shame is a big one as well. So, you know, talking to people and recognising that, you know, mental health is a disease, addiction is a disease, and, you know, just being a bit kinder. So, like, I very much focus on self-care because it's the oxygen mask analogy. I have to put on my oxygen mask first if I'm going to turn up for things like my job, people I love, you know, if I'm going to turn up. So, you know, there are lots and lots of different things, and you're going to speak to 10 different people and get, you know, a million different bits of advice, and some advice is good, some not so much, but really it's about, you know, keeping your feet on the ground, keeping focused on what's in front of you. And, you know, just to finish, it's when we're in recovery, we have to challenge our old way of thinking, because that evidently hasn't worked, because that's what's got us to where we are. So one of the things that I do is I challenge the way I do things. So if I, for instance, don't want to go to a meeting tonight because I can't be bothered, that means that I need to go to a meeting tonight. You know, if I don't want to call a friend, you know, and reach out because I want to self-isolate, then I will do the thing that I don't want to do. And I've never regretted doing that. Triggers are something that I actually don't have many of these days. Now, that's only because I go back to those strategies of letting things go. If something's triggering me, I can tend to look at the situation and be like, is this something I really need to be getting upset about or giving emotional energy to right now? Like, what is that going to achieve? I can generally just take a breath and kind of move through it. Having said that, I get triggered. If I'm going to get triggered, it's usually by really random things at random times. It's not the things you would expect. I remember a few months ago I was at cinema and there was an advert around domestic violence. It was like a domestic violence awareness campaign, and I was in the cinema and I watched it, and I had a flashback to my dad and a family situation when I was a child, and that absolutely took me back. It was just because it wasn't expected, and I'm going to be honest, I let myself go through the feelings rather than try and push them down. And I think that's another thing we do. We minimise our feelings because we don't want to be a burden to people, and we don't want to be seen as like being dramatic or overreacting. But actually, we can't go round these things. Like, you know, if you're triggered, if you're having a bad day, if you're having a panic attack, if you're wanting to pick up a drink, you know, the biggest thing I have is connection. If I pick up the phone or send a text to somebody I know is going to be there to support me, or remove myself from a triggering situation, you know, I know that it will pass. Otherwise, what we do is we isolate, and there's a really good saying in recovery we have is that, you know, the opposite of addiction is connection. Yeah, I have actually. I think, oh God, I don't think there's a person, you know, who I know with mental health who hasn't, you know, experienced it at some point. I've been sacked by more than one employer by disclosing I have bipolar disorder. And obviously I'm not going to call anyone out, and it was a long time ago and not in this field, but I remember at the time just feeling so angry. And like I wanted to fight it, and I just ended up sort of walking away from those situations, just sort of thinking, oh well, you've sort of dodged a bullet there. But you know, that's the big stuff, yeah. And thankfully we are much more protected. There's been a lot of progress since then about how employers need to treat people, you know, who have mental health and addiction issues. I'm quite lucky generally that the people I know, the people that I spend time with, are very understanding, and the people that, you know, I'm going to keep close to me are the ones that have supported me. But I do think it is a really important thing to sort of be mindful of, because unfortunately, as much as there's been a lot of work around, you know, destigmatising mental health, I actually think that there is a huge amount of work to be done, especially with regard to dual diagnosis. So mental health and addiction. I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding around that, and you know, there's a lot more that we can do to challenge some of the narratives around people having an addiction, because you know, there's a really sort of strong narrative that being an addict is a choice, and it's absolutely not. Nobody would choose to be in addiction. However, having said that, it is a choice in a way to actually start to get the help. You know, we have to have agency over our addiction, but you know, yes, there's a lot of work to be done. I think, you know, it is about being kind to yourself, self-compassion. I've done a lot of work on that. I've written about it. I'm really interested in how we can sort of foster a little bit more self-compassion in recovery while being accountable for our actions. It's kind of a bit of a balancing act. So you know, for me, it is about stopping and just assessing where you're at. There's a lovely, actually I just remembered, there's a wonderful tool that my sponsor actually gave me, and it's called the HALT technique, and it's HALT. And usually when you're in a bit of a bind, so for me it's when I like want to pick up or I'm feeling a bit anxious, it's, are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Or are you tired? And generally, I'm probably all four of those things if I need to ask myself that question. But what that means is, you know, we're not looking at the bigger picture, we're actually looking at like, oh, you know, have I eaten today? Am I dehydrated? Have I had enough sleep? You know, it's these little things, and I was really annoyed when I came into recovery when I realised that all of these old tropes that we hear, you know, get more exercise, eat better food, get enough sleep. Actually, that really is the basis of my recovery. If I don't sleep well, I notice the changes, you know, pretty quickly, especially with bipolar. You know, the thing with bipolar is that it's like everything, like being sick or not getting enough sleep or being a bit stressed, that would impact anybody. But for somebody with bipolar, everything is amplified, like by 100, right? So I kind of have to put a lot more work into my self-care to keep myself well. Again, it's that oxygen mask. I think to anyone in like crisis, or who's thinking, gosh, you know, I'm worried about my mental health right now, I'm not coping, I'm in a, you know, I'm worried that I've got an issue around drinking or drugs, reach out, like, to anyone. There are so many places for you to take that first step, and it is only a small step to get, you know, to get everything moving. And it feels scary, and it is scary, it's going to be, but if you reach out to the right places, you know, when I stepped into AA for the first time, I was terrified, and those guys held me up and kept me safe until I was able to sort of, you know, start doing the work myself. So just reach out, and we will, you know, ensure that you have lots of you know, places that you can do that. AA, I just, you know, honestly, there's nothing stopping you going to a meeting or just giving them a call or going onto their website. Absolutely transformed my life. If you're somebody, and I would like to mention, if you are somebody that has experience of being the child of an alcoholic, and when we're adults we're still, you know, we are still children of alcoholics, or you're a parent and you're worried about your drinking and how that's impacting on your children and your family, I can really strongly recommend NACOA. It's a National Association for the Children of Alcoholics. They are an amazing resource. Bipolar UK is another amazing resource, and they can sort of, they've got other information about sort of wider mental health issues as well. I also absolutely, when I first came into recovery, and actually about 2 years leading up to actually getting sober, I was obsessed with Quit Lit, and that sort of memoirs and people writing about their experiences around addiction and recovery sometimes. And I still have all of those books at home, a pile about that big of Quit Lit books, and I've written some blogs on those as well. So, you know, if you want to get into some of that, you know, if you want to start reading about it, I found that the best way to start to realise that I had a problem was actually reading other people's experiences. Yeah, so take it a day at a time. That, as I said earlier, is like absolutely my number one. I start the day with some gratitude and just remind myself that I'm here today, I'm sober, I don't have a hangover, like the smallest things. I can turn up today at work and hold my head up. I don't owe anyone apologies, and if I do, then I am very willing to make those apologies. I really try and be kind to people around me, and again, you know, if anything comes up in the day, this is a big thing. I can see my behaviours. If I'm having a bad day, that's okay, because I can see my behaviours and go, okay, like, you're a little bit snappy today, or perhaps you owe that person a bit of an apology. I'll just do it. I'll just put my hand up, say sorry, and move on. And you know, if a good day for me is getting my head on the pillow that night, sober, and with a sort of a peace of mind that I can sort of get up tomorrow and do it again, and, you know, try and be better the next day. So yeah, I think it's a case of just keeping things simple, keeping the good people close to you, and yeah, taking things as they come.